First of all, welcome to EP. Um, we have around a few people. Let's give everybody a little bit of time to jump in. Has anybody taken the SAT yet, by the way? Feel free to use the chat as well. So let's see. So we have, I'll give everybody just a little bit of time to get in. While they come in, let me just introduce myself. So my name is Paul Carey. Uh, I have been tutoring for years now. So almost around 20 years at this point. And I've done a lot of different things. So SAT, ACT, chemistry, physics, all these different things. So um, as far as test prep, right, one of the biggest things that we want to make sure that we do is set you guys up for success. So today we're going to talk a lot about different types of strategies you can use for the SAT, as well as game plan, and then just kind of like going over some of the specific course material. Okay. If you guys ever have any type of questions, always feel free to use the chat. If there's anything that you're not sure about or have just want to talk about or anything like that, just let me know. I will ask you guys some different types of questions, so feel free to put your answers in the chat as well. Outside of that, let's see, what time are we at? I'll give people one more minute to jump in, and then we'll start talking about the SAT. All right, so let's just jump in now. So one of the first things that we want to talk about is test optional versus test blind. So this has been something that's happened recently, where there's a lot of schools that have became test optional compared to test blind. Um, and the biggest difference is that when you're talking about test blind, that means that they're just not going to look at the test at all, right? So they're not looking at the test. Test optional, however, is going to be a situation where what ends up happening is they actually do look at the test. So if you do take the SAT and get a really good score, it's going to help you out compared to the other students if they didn't do as well. So just making sure that you know the difference between like your test optional and your test blind is going to be one of the biggest things. Um, I'll just kind of like read through this so that you guys can see this as well. Um, in the ever-changing landscape of the college admissions, especially in the dynamics of COVID-19, it is important to fully understand the difference between these two tests. Okay, so many colleges still use these standardized tests to filter through thousands of applicants, and have stopped requiring test scores, at least temporarily. Right. Um, I'll jump down to the bottom part. So bottom line, students who choose not to take the test scores will be competing against students that have did those, right? The national rate of currently deferred college students is around 20% this year. We expect to have a substantial impact on the missions for these various different classes, okay? So let's jump into a little bit more about what we're going to talk about today. So overview, so we're going to talk about the SAT, just like a little bit of that. And then we're going to talk about strategies and practices. So one of the big changes that the SAT made is they went from a paper copy to digital now. So because they're digital, the exam is completely different. So if you've taken the paper copy before, one of the biggest things that kind of keep in mind is that this is a totally different exam, and it has a totally different feel to it. And we'll talk about how it's different and then what are some of the cool things to kind of like keep in mind when you're going through the exam. So as far as today, we'll talk about reading for 25 minutes, the writing for 25 minutes, and then the math for around 50 minutes or so. Okay. And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit more about what's next, what you guys can do. And then we'll have a little bit of time for questions and answers after that. Okay. So as far as the digital SAT format, okay, there's two sections. There's the reading and writing section that has two different modules to it. Actually, let me use this one. And then there's the math section that also has two modules. So with that respect, there's going to be a chance to get a module easy and a module hard, right? How you perform in the first module determines the difficulty level of the module two in both sections. So one of the biggest things that we want to do is we want to make sure that we do really well in that first module because that first module is going to be the thing that lets you get those high scores, right? If you don't really do as well in the first module, you'll get the easy module and your score will be capped. So the capping is around what we've seen so far is around like 550 points or so to like 600 points or so per section. So we really want to make sure that you do well in that first module, spend a lot of time in that so that you can get the difficult second module, okay? Um, this is also going to be taken on the College Board's digital testing app, the Blue Book. So students are going to download the app before the test on an appropriate device. So you can bring your own device or there's going to be devices at the testing center as well, okay? Oh, sorry, I need to mention that. So when you download this app, you won't be able to access anything else on your device when you bring it in. So that's just one of the things that the College Board implemented. Okay. The next thing is that just talking about some tools and strategies. So one of the things that the SAT has is they have this mark for review type of button. As you can see over here, you have your for review. So when you're going through your questions, you can always mark them if you want to come back to those questions, like question 3 right here. The next thing is that there's going to be a testing timer. A clock counts down the time remaining for each of the modules. You can hide the timer if you want to, and there's also going to be a 5-minute alert. Okay, so just one of those things to kind of keep in mind. Some students do really well with the amount of time shown. Some students don't really like that. So it's all about figuring out what you like the best. And one of the big things to make sure that you all do is take the practice exams that are on the College Board. This will give you an idea of what you like, as well as give you a chance to kind of use some of these different tools so that you get comfortable with those before the exam compared to getting in the exam and then having all these different tools that are all around. So just make sure that you guys are taking those practice exams. I think there is about 5 or 6 of those that are uploaded right now. Some are going to be varying level of difficulty. So just make sure you take multiple ones. And then think about what you like about the exams and what things are kind of like challenging, right? These are going to be a couple different things that kind of really help you out as you go through and prepare for your official exam, okay? There's also going to be a Desmos calculator. If you guys use Desmos calculators and you're comfortable with that, perfect. Just know that you are also allowed to bring your own calculator as long as it's approved, okay? So you have different options. You can use the Desmos calculators that's on there, or you can bring your own. A lot of students are a lot more comfortable bringing their own calculator than using the Desmos calculator. So it just kind of, again, it's your personal preference. But one of the biggest things is just making sure that you have a chance to, making sure that you have a chance to go through that exam beforehand to figure out what you like and what you don't like, okay? There's also going to be a reference sheet. So on the math section, you have access to a list of the common formulas, right? So you're not going to necessarily have to remember all the equations for the math portion. This is definitely something that's going to be helpful and key. There's also going to be an annotation tool, right? This is going to be good, just like I'm highlighting right now. You're going to have that chance to highlight and leave notes within the reading and the writing section, okay? And then there's also the cross out tool. So you want to make sure that when you get rid of an answer choice, you can always cross it out so that you don't have to worry about that. So that's just one of the other things to kind of keep in mind. Okay. As far as structure and timing, we already said that there's 2 modules. There's going to be that first module, and the first module is going to be 32 minutes with 27 questions. And then there's going to be that module 2 that also has 32 minutes with 27 questions. As we said before, there's going to be the easy portion as well as the hard portion. And this all depends on how you do on module 1. Okay? After that, you're going to have a 10-minute break. And then you're going to have the math section. And just like the reading and writing section, the math is going to have the same amount of minutes per section. So 35 minutes per, and then 22 questions. Same thing as before. You're going to have either easy or hard section, depending on how you performed on the first module, okay? So overall, one of the interesting things about the SAT that's digital now is it's a lot shorter as far as time-wise. So it's just over 2 hours, and there's less questions now. So that's just one of those things to kind of keep in mind as far as those two sections. In addition to that, now the reading and writing portion are combined, so they're not individualized how they were before. And we'll talk about what kind of things to kind of keep in mind for those. As far as your scoring, the scoring has not changed. You're still going to have the option to get from 200 to 800 on the reading and writing, and 200 to 800 on the math as well. Okay. These are all going to be in your 10-point intervals. So your overall composite score is going to go from 400 to a 1600. Okay. Scores are released days, not weeks after testing. And this is one of the cool things about having this as a digital type of situation as well. So big picture strategy, we talked a little bit about this already. Module 1 is the most important module, right, for both sections. So you want to make sure that you put your best effort in for those, and just stay positive when you're going through the exam. Again, get a sense of test taking, test pacing as well. This is going to happen with your practice exams. Okay, so your reading and writing performance does not impact your math. Okay, treat these sections as isolated chunks, right? So they all are both individual. Don't worry about them being combined. And then get familiar with that digital format as we talked about before, right? So you don't want to have a surprise on test day. Okay. Annotation tools, cross-out tools, the mark for review, the hide, the viewer time. Again, that Desmos calculator. Just want to make sure that you're comfortable as possible when you're going through this. One thing to keep in mind is if you're not sure about an answer, save those all to the end, and then you can always go back and just use letter of the day. Okay, so this is going to be your guessing letter. So what letter of the day means is that you want to make sure that you just choose one letter and then just click that and then just go with that for the ones that you're not sure about. There's no penalty for wrong answers, so you want to make sure that you never leave anything blank. Okay. All right, so let's jump into the SAT reading and writing portion. As we said before, there's going to be those two modules. One of the things to kind of keep in mind, though, is that these are combined in the same module now. The reading is always going to come first. The writing is coming second. So the reading is going to typically go from question 1 to around question 13 to 17. And the writing is going to start anywhere from question 14 to 18 and then go through 27. Why is this important? One of the things that we tell students is that you want to focus on one section at a time, prioritize the one that's the easiest for you. The vast majority of students should start with the writing because this is going to be the easiest one. Remember that you're going to get the same amount of points for a hard question as well as an easy question. And the writing is one where it's typically a little bit easier than the reading, a lot quicker with some of those different problems. So you want to kind of go towards that section first, work those problems, and then come back to the reading. As far as the reading and writing content, there's going to be short excerpts, around 2 to 5 sentences from all these different things. One of the new things that you see is there's going to be excerpts from poems, letters, and plays. This is something that wasn't with the SAT before. So just one of those things to kind of keep in mind as well. Okay. As far as the questions, there's going to be words and context that come first. And these are going to come consecutively. Why is that important? This is good because it allows your mind to kind of still stay on the same wavelength as far as thinking about how you're going to solve those different types of problems, okay? So what you want to do, words and context, those are consecutive. And then you have your function, dual passage comparison, character analysis, main ideas, details, author's purpose, and they appear in the middle, okay? And then your charts and graphs appear second to last, but those are consecutively as well. And then text completion appears at the end, but that is also consecutively, okay? As you can see, words and context is that biggest category that you're going to get. Text completion and charts and graphs are up there as well. And your main ideas are going to be a decent amount of questions, okay? So now let's talk about some of the strategy portion. Okay? So with respect to the exam, we use this thing called the 4-step strategy. The first thing that we want to do is we want to preview and prioritize. So as we mentioned before, we don't want to start with the reading. We want to start with the writing first because that's where we're going to get our most points at with respect to the easier questions. And then we want to work the questions, okay? So working the questions basically means that we're going to look at those individual questions, figure out the keywords, and then use that to kind of help us out. Once we work that question part, then we can use that information to actively work the passage, looking for that information finding any type of keys or clues that are going to be there to help us out. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to cover up the answer choices. We want to speak for ourselves. And then we want to use our process of elimination. So one of the key things to kind of think about is that the answer choices actually aren't necessarily there to help you out. They're there to kind of like throw you off a little bit, right? They try to put things into your mind that could sound right. And now you're in this process of trying to figure out if it's wrong or if it's right, compared to thinking about, well, what should it be in the first place? So we're going to talk about how we would go through those in just a second. Okay. So to start out, we're just going to talk, we won't work through all these problems, but we do want to talk about these two things. Remember that we said that there's going to be easier questions and then there's going to be harder questions, right? So one thing that we want to keep in mind is let's do the easier questions and the easier passages before we do the harder questions and harder passages. So we can preview the full reading and writing section. Where does the reading end at, right? And where does that writing begin? So remember we said it's going to be somewhere around like 13 to 18 where those two are going to meet at. So you want to preview first and then work through the writing one first, unless you just really love the reading. So you want to figure out which section you'll do first, right? And one of the biggest things is those practice exams are going to help you get an idea of what you want to do first. Okay? Prioritize easier reading passages and questions over the harder ones. What you can do is you can use your Mark for Review tool to bookmark those ones that you want to use later of the day. So when we're talking about the easier questions, words and context questions are going to be fairly easy, and detailed questions are going to be fairly easy. The other ones that require us to do a lot more reading and analysis, like your main idea or your dual passage type of questions, these are going to be harder because they take a lot more time. There's a lot more complication with getting lost in those a little bit. So we want to make sure that we're always doing the easy ones first, because we know that they're all worth the same amount, right? So if you get a hard question right, if you get an easy question right, it does not matter. They're going to be worth the same amount. So let's get the easy ones right first. And then if we have time to get through all the hard ones, we can go to those next. Like we said, the poetry part and the older texts and plays and excerpts, these are going to be new, but these can be kind of challenging sometimes. They ask a lot of stuff about Old English, or these are passages that have been wrote in the 1700s, 1600s, 1800s, where the language is kind of off. So we want to make sure that we're doing the best as we can as far as staying away from those harder ones until later. So let's check out a couple of different questions. So this question right here is one that we look at, and let me highlight this. So it says, which choice completes the text's most logical and precise word or phrase? This right here is going to be one of those easier questions. As we mentioned before, these words in context are going to be those easier ones that we want to kind of do before anything else, because we know that those are going to be a lot more simple. And that's going to be able to help us get towards our answer choice. So I'll just show you one of the strategies that we use just to start out. So with word and context, we actually have a really cool strategy that we do. So what we try to do is we try to not read those answer choices to start, right? And we try to figure out what will we put here instead of that. And then what we can do is we can use our process of elimination to get rid of answer choices. So this one says, artist Marilyn Dingle's intrinsic coiled baskets are something, sweetgrass and palmetto palm, right? Following a whatever technique that originated in West Africa, Dingle skillfully winds up a thin palm found around a bunch of sweetgrass with the help of a sewing bone, and creates the basket, a signature for no factory to produce, right? So what can we put in here? So artist Maryland indicate cool baskets are created or built. Built. Right? Built from, right? So we could say we're going to put our own word in here. So in this case, word or phrase. So they are built from sweetgrass and palmetto. So now we can do our process of elimination. We've already spoke for ourselves. And now what we can do is we can get rid of answer choices that don't work with what we said. So indicated by, that doesn't really sound good. Handmade from, that's kind of like built from. represented by, not necessarily built from, and collected with, again, not necessarily built from. So just by doing that, we don't have to worry about getting caught up with all these different answer choices because we already know what we think it's going to be, right? So this is one of those strategies that can kind of help us out. And we see that this problem doesn't necessarily take as much time, but let's check out another problem. What about this one? Which choice best describes the function of the underlying question in the text as a whole? Well, this one is fairly simple. How lifelike are they, right? So this is one that's going to be another easy type of question that we would want to work first because we know that we can quickly solve that one. How about those challenging ones? Well, compared to the last one, let's check this question out. So the question says, based on the text, how would Roberts and Gonzalez from text 2 most likely respond to Chin's findings in text 1, right? This means that we're going to have to read all of those parts, right? Read text 2 first, understand what they think, or Gonzalez and Roberts thinks, and then read Chin's part for text 1, and then figure that out, and then get to this overall answer choice, right? So this is going to take a lot more time, and this is why we consider this one of those harder questions that we don't really want to work on first, right? So this is going to be one that we will want to save till last. Okay. So let's check out another one that's a little bit interesting as well, right? What is the best, what choice best states the main idea of the text? Well, again, this one's the main idea. So we can kind of read through this, get a big idea of like what the main thing is going to be. And then once we can answer that, then we can just kind of summarize for ourselves and then use that to get rid of our answer choices. Okay. So this is another one that's going to be a little bit more on that easy side because we know how we're going to be able to go about it. We don't have to compare multiple passages. We don't have any tricky types of things. It's just really understanding the main idea behind this. Okay. So let's check out charts and graphs. So charts and graphs are also kind of interesting, right? It says which choice most effectively uses the data from the table to complete the statement. So now if we're thinking about this one, now we have to do two things. We have to first analyze the chart that's above. And then we also have to read the passage as well and figure out which one is going to go there. So because of that, this is going to be one that's going to be a little bit harder, which is going to take more time. So this is, again, another one that we want to save till last. Okay. Just like this one, let's check and see which choice best describes the data from the graph that supports Martinez's colleague's conclusion. Well, what are we going to have to do? We're going to have to basically read this portion, understand what the graph is talking about, and then come back and read this part as well. So let's actually work through this problem a little bit. So what's the first thing? We want to look at the graph and see what information is there and how can that be helpful to us. So we want to make sure that we're looking at the key or the legend, right, to see what the different values are going to be. And then we want to look at our axes. So we have years, we have area and square meters. Make sure you keep in mind the units that are going to be there as well. And then we also see that our change is by 20,000 each time, right? So what do we notice? Well, in this one, we notice that as the years increase, this forest cover goes down. We can see as the years increase, this bare soil kind of like goes down then up, right? And then our grass goes up, right? So we have three different trends that we notice from all of these. So let's check out the question now. It says, the Jordan Dam was built on Provo River in Utah in 1992. Earth scientist Adriana Martinez and colleagues tracked changes to the environment on the banks of the river downstream of the dam, including how much grass and forest cover was present. They concluded that the dam changed the flow of the river in ways that benefited grass plants. Here, actually needs this. Benefited grass plants, but didn't benefit trees. Okay. So this one says, which choice best describes the data from the graph that supports this? Well, we said that we're looking for something that says it supported the grass plants, which are these that we saw increased. And then the forest trees, or the forest cover is going to be that tree part that we see went down. So let's look at the answer choices now and think about our process of elimination, right? So we can say that we saw that over the years, this is us speaking for ourselves, the grass went up and the trees went down. So let's check out question A. And remember, there's three different things that we want to do. We want to give answer choices a yes, a no, and a maybe. We want to do this quickly and because we want to get through all the answer choices. If something sounds wrong right away that doesn't go with what you thought before, get rid of it. If it's something that kind of works, maybe we want to keep that around for as long as possible. And then we can get rid of the answer choices at the end. So let's check out this first one. The lowest amount of grass cover was approximately 58,000 square meters, and the highest amount of forest cover was approximately 75, blah, 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 right? So what we can say is that in this case, this may have been true, right? But does that support the information that we're talking about with respect to benefiting grass and benefiting trees? Well, it doesn't. It talks about the amounts, but it doesn't necessarily help us out overall. So we can get rid of this one. What about the next one? There was more grass cover in the forest in 1987, and the difference increased dramatically in 1999 and again in 2006. Well, what do we see? Well, in 1987, there wasn't more grass cover than the forest. So we know that this one is also going to be incorrect. Let's check out C. There was less grass cover on bare soil in 1987 and more grass cover on bare soil in 1993 and 2006, whereas there was more forest cover in all three. Maybe we'll keep it as a chance, but let's check out what answer choice C. Grass cover increased from 1987 to 1993. Okay, cool. We saw that happened. And from 93 to 2006. Okay, we also saw that. Whereas forest cover decreased in those periods. Awesome. So now we know that one sounds good, and this one doesn't sound as good anymore, and we're going to go with D as our answer choice. So again, when we're talking about easy or hard types of questions, this is one that took a little bit more time because first we had to analyze this material, and then after we analyzed that, we had to read through this, and then we had to use our process of elimination to get rid of these answer choices and then come down to get our answer choice was going to be D. Okay. So just remember that when we're thinking about these questions, we want to make sure that we're answering the easier ones first and then going to the harder ones. But we want to do this by using our speak for ourselves. And then we're going to use our process of elimination to get rid of answer choices that don't go with what we said, right? So one thing that you see that I do on this is there's a lot of annotations. Really, really get used to using your annotation tools. It just makes it so much easier when you're able to like actually highlight different things or highlight specific parts of information, just like we highlighted this benefits of grass, but didn't benefit trees, right? So we want to make sure that we're thinking about the specific question and answering that specifically when we're going through these different types of passages, okay? So we tried out a couple little problems. Let's get into a couple more reading strategies and practice. Did you know the answers are not your friends, right? And this is one of those things that we kind of mentioned earlier. The answers are there to kind of throw you off, right? There's a lot of trap answers. There's a lot of trap questions. They do this by a lot of different things, right? So we always want to start with the easy questions, summarize the answers on your own words, cover the answer choices, and then eliminate as you uncover those answers. Watch out for traps. So loaded language, right? So when you have things that are very extreme or there's like redundant words or a lot of stuff, just make sure that you think about what's that main idea, right? Does it go with what you said already? Negative connotation, right? Except in the dual passage. So one thing that you want to keep out for or keep a lookout for is like overly negative type of answer choices. Unless the passage is negative or unless there's some type of conflict, like how there's going to be in a dual passage, you want to look out for those negative connotation type of answer choices. Okay? And then opinion-based words. So when they say like, this is the only way, right? Or this is, there's no other possibility, right? Where they're very extreme. You want to watch out for those as well. Oftentimes those answer choices are going to be incorrect as well. So just make sure that you're thinking about what type of information they're giving you. And then what are some of the words? I kind of think about the SAT almost like a word search, if you think about it. One of the things that happens with these is that there's a lot of different clues that are going to be in the answer choices. There's going to be, or sorry, not in the answer choice. There's going to be a lot of clues that are in the passage. that are going to be able to help you out, especially for that reading and writing portion. So what you want to do is you want to look around and kind of see some of those clues. And we're going to talk about that as we continue to go along with today's deck. So again, we already talked a little bit about this one, the writing content. So we said that there's going to be a large amount of, or so there's going to be those excerpts. There's going to be those bulleted research notes. There's going to be the author's purpose, research base, that are going to come last. We're going to have transitions. They're also going to come consecutively. And then the grammar-based questions are going to come first. So as you can see, author's purpose is going to be one of those big things, as well as punctuation and transitions. So we want to make sure that we're getting as much as we can out of those big chunks before anything else. Okay. So key strategy, we already kind of talked a little bit about this. So prioritize your easy question types. Use the mark for review tool to help you out with this. Make sure that you're reading for full context, right? So context is so important in the SAT. You want to make sure that you're reading all the material, because there's going to be stuff about times or dates or people or subjects or verbs that are going to happen within the whole context. So just want to make sure that you're reading everything, not necessarily just one line for majority of the questions. Okay. So use letter of the day on those harder questions, right? We don't want you spending your time trying to work through a lot of these hard questions when you can get to the easier ones. So make sure that for those harder ones that you're not sure of, mark those for review. You can always come back to them later. Get the points where you can, get the answers, the easy answers first. Okay. Make sure that you always remember to plug in your final answer choice. Okay. You only get time to change the underline portion, right? So sometimes we have to choose the best answer out of answers that are not necessarily always convenient or that work really, really well. Okay. And then just one thing to kind of keep in mind, there's never two right answers. So there's always going to be a way to kind of get rid of one of the answer choices. As far as punctuation, punctuation is the most heavily tested area in the exam. Okay. So we want to make sure that we're using that to kind of help us out. There's three different types of punctuation. There's going to be stop punctuation. There's going to be go punctuation. There's going to be half stop punctuation. And then there's also going to be apostrophes as well. Okay? And we'll talk about how to work through these different types of things. So now that we talked about the exam, let's get into a little bit more of the content and strategies. Okay? So one thing with the punctuation or the writing section is we always want to look to see what's changing in the answer choices. This is what's going to let us know what's being tested. Okay. So this is cool because we have these things called punctuation rules that can help us out. Remember, this test is going to be something that's different than all the tests that you've probably taken in your life to this point, right? It's 2 hours long. It's testing things that you learned in middle school, elementary school, first year of high school, right? So there's a lot of different things that are coming at you. So we want to make sure that we're trying to keep this as simple as possible. The first way that we can do that is by using some simple strategies, right? When's the last time that you had to think about what's the correct usage of a semicolon or a colon or a dash or all these different things, right? They're kind of complicated sometimes if you think about it that way. So what we do is we actually have a strategy where we can kind of think about what different forms of punctuation are used to connect certain things. And then we don't have to necessarily realize or make sure that we know like all the individual ones, right? Remember that you get points for answering questions correct, not how you answer them. If you guessed on everything and got every single question correct, that's perfectly fine, right? Because it's about getting the points. However, we want to make sure that we're using our strategies to kind of get there. So one of the first ones that we have is this thing called our vertical line test. And with the vertical line test, sorry, let me get the highlighter tool. So with the vertical line test, what we do is we basically look where the punctuation is changing. We draw a vertical line there, and we want to look and see to the left of that and to the right of that, is the sentence complete or incomplete? Okay. So this is going to be for our stop punctuation. We need to have two complete ideas. Okay? So we need to have two complete ideas. Okay. So in this case, you need to have a complete idea on the left and on the right. Okay. What is a complete idea? It needs to have a subject, a verb, and a full expression of an idea. When you say that, what's a full expression of an idea? One thing that I kind of think about is if someone was going to explain something to you and you were like, you felt like you needed additional information, right? So somebody's like, you won't believe what happened earlier. And you're like, okay, that's cool. What happened, right? Or the red car. If someone says like the red car, you're like, okay, the red car. What about the red car, right? When you feel like you need a little bit more information about something, that's going to be one where it's not a full expression. So that would be an incomplete idea, right? So if they said the red car is beautiful or the red car is fast, now we have a complete idea. We know the subject, the car, we know what it is, or the verb, the red car is, and then what is it? It's beautiful, right? So we know that full expression of an idea. So that's just one of the kind of things to think about when you're thinking about complete versus incomplete. So with with stop punctuation, we have 5 different types. We have our periods, we have our semicolons, we have our comma plus our fanboys, we have question marks, and we have exclamation marks. These 2 at the bottom are going to be rare. So you're not going to see those that often, okay? And one of the cool things that we talked about earlier, just kind of coming back to this, is that there's never going to be 2 right answers. So with that being said, if we have a stop punctuation situation where we have complete and incomplete, only one of these is actually going to work as long as they're the same form. So let's check and see what this looks like. So the first thing that we want to do is we want to look at the answer choices for this one and check and see where the punctuation is changing, right? So we see that it's changing right here in between world building and breaking. So what we want to do is we want to draw a vertical line over here and we want to say what's going to be on this side and this side. Are they both going to be complete or incomplete? So let's check out this part. It says, fantasy writer Brandon Sanderson is known for his complex character development and intricate world building. Okay, cool. So we know who it is. Our subject is this person. We know that he's known for something. And what is he known for? He's known for character development and intricate world building. Awesome. That's a complete idea. And then let's check out the other side. Breaking with the traditional publishing establishment, Sanderson has recently come under fire for launching a crowdfunding company publishing his most recent works. Okay, cool. We also know that that's going to be another complete idea. We know what's happening. Sanderson has come under fire. What did he come under fire for? For launching something that's working, that a campaign for his work, right? So because of that, we know that this is going to be our stop punctuation. So because now we can get rid of anything that's not stop. So right here we have a comma, which is not our stop punctuation, right? As we said before, we have our periods, semicolons, and then our commas plus our fanboys. We'll talk about commas and fanboys a little bit further down, what those are. But we said that we have our comma right here, but we don't see our fanboy. So we just have a comma. That doesn't work. This one, we see that there's no punctuation between those two. So that doesn't work. We see right here, there's also no punctuation that's there. And then we go to our last one where we see we have our stop punctuation with our period, and we're good. Okay. Let's check out how that looks with a semicolon now. So it says which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English. So what do? We see where our punctuation is changing, and then we draw our vertical line. Let's read this one out. The Mission 66 initiative, which was approved by Congress in 1956, represented the major investment in the infrastructure overburdened national parks. Cool. So that one will be complete. And then let's check out the next one. It prioritizes physical improvements in the park's roads, utilities, employee housing, and visitor facilities, while also establishing educational program for the public. Cool. This is also complete. One thing to kind of keep in mind is that when we have it, right, and the sentence is still connects this way, then we know that we know what the it represents, right? If this would have been a period and it would have started with it, then that would be a different type of situation because we need to make sure we know what our subject is. However, because we don't have that period there, we know that this is complete and this is complete. And the it, if you ever have a question about this, or if you're ever not sure if that's going to be complete or not, make sure you think what the it is and then read through the sentence with replacing the it with whatever the subject is, right? So the Mission 66 initiative prioritized physical improvements in the parks and roads, right? And now it sounds a lot more like a complete idea. Okay. So what can we say? Because that's complete and complete. Now we can get rid of any options that aren't stop punctuation. We see this one doesn't have stop punctuation there. We see that this one doesn't have stop punctuation there. We see that this one doesn't have stop punctuation there. And we know that this is the only one that has stop punctuation. So again, this makes it a lot more simple because now we don't have to necessarily think about all those individual rules. So one exception for semicolons is that sometimes they're going to be used for lists where you have commas that are already being used. So say, for example, something like Miami, Florida, if this is going to be in a list, what do we want to do? We don't want to have Miami, Florida with a comma there, and then Tacoma, Washington with a comma there. So we want to make sure that we're thinking about using our semicolons at this portion to make sure that those things are also separated. Okay. These happen very infrequent, but they do appear. So make sure you're just reading the context carefully and then identifying if any semicolons are already there. This will be your clue. So remember that we said it's kind of like that crossword type of puzzle or that word search. There's a lot of different clues that are around, and we just want to use those to kind of help us out. Okay. So let's check out this semicolons in a list type of situation. Actually, this one is the dashes. So we'll come back to this one a little bit later. But one of the things that I want to make sure that you think about is right here. So if you start to notice that these have your semicolons and your commas, you just want to keep that same pattern up. This is what we call consistent. So you just want to make sure that you're consistent with how you're going through it the whole time, okay? All right, so commas plus fanboys. So we talked about fanboys before. Have any of you ever heard of fanboys, by the way? Okay. So what fanboys are, or they're going to be conjunctions. So you have for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. Okay. So these are going to be your fanboys. So if you ever have a comma that's connected with one of these words, this is also going to be a form of stop punctuation. So let's check this one out. Let's check the right part and the left part. As we see, we have something changing here. So let's see, the first part, Dutch painter Vincent van Gogh often reused canvases because he couldn't afford new ones. Cool. It's a complete idea. But it still came as a surprise when art conservators at the National Galleries of Scotland discovered a hidden self-portrait behind Van Gogh's head of a peasant woman when they were preparing it for display in 2022. Okay. One thing to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking about the fanboy part, if you have a comma plus that fanboy, you don't want to necessarily consider that fanboy in the sense of completer and complete ideas. So in this case, instead of thinking about that but part, you would just say it still came as a surprise when art conservators in the National Galleries of Scotland discovered a hidden self-portrait behind Vincent van Gogh's head of a peasant woman when he was preparing it for display in 2022. Right. So when you're talking about your commas plus your fanboys, you don't want to think about the but part with completion. So in this case, we can say that this is complete. So now we have two complete ideas. So we know that we're using stop punctuation. We don't have stop punctuation here, don't have stop punctuation there, and we do right here because we have our comma plus our fanboy. Okay. So these are just some of those small rules that we want to make sure that we think about and that we keep in mind when we're going through these different types of questions. Okay. So that was going to be our stop punctuation. Let's talk about another form. So this next one is going to be go punctuation. Go punctuation is interesting because there's three different situations where you can have go punctuation. For stop, we said that you need to have two complete ideas. With go punctuation, you need to make sure that you have at least one incomplete idea. So you can have a complete and an incomplete. You can have an incomplete and a complete. And you can have an incomplete and an incomplete. Okay. So one thing to kind of note with this is that if you ever start off with an incomplete, then we know right away that this is going to be a go punctuation. Okay. this is one of those keys that really helps us out with these different situations. So go punctuations are going to be our commas. And then I'll just write this way, our no punctuation as well. Okay. So two different forms of punctuation that we want to kind of keep in mind. Our commas, our no punctuation. And then as we said before, there's only going to be these situations where we need to have something where it's incomplete. Okay. Let's see. Oh, one thing to mention is when you're in your exam, I want you to make sure that you're actually drawing your vertical line and then putting your complete or your incomplete on each side, right? This way you don't have to really think about it too much after you read it. You don't want to have to go back and reread it and see if it's complete or incomplete as you go through. So just make sure you're being active with writing in your exam. You see how much writing I'm doing on this slide right now? Just make sure you're doing that same amount when you're going through. It's just going to help you with the more annotations that you take. Okay, so let's check out this portion. We see that it's the punctuation is changing right here, right? So what can we do at this point? We look and we say, are we going to have a complete or incomplete at the for the top? So the haiku like poems from Tomas and Trans Romer. Another thing I'll also say is that if you're not sure how to pronounce a name or if there's ever anything that's like weird, don't worry about pronouncing it all the way because it's not really going to help you out with the bigger understanding. So in this case, you could just say TT or Mr. T or whatever you want to do, right? You don't want to get caught up in those other little small things when you're not necessarily sure. Just make sure that you're continuing to flow through. All this is really is just a name. Okay. So haiku poems of Mr. T, which present natural or nature and dream influence images in crisp, spare language, have earned Swedish poet praise from leading contemporary writers. Cool. That's a complete idea. And then what else do we have? Among them, Nigerian American essayist and novelist T. Cole, who has written trans whatever works containing a luminous simplicity. So in this case, this is incomplete, right? Because we don't necessarily know what that main like subject is or what that did. Okay. So now because of that, we know that we can use our go punctuation. And with our go punctuation, what answer choices can we get rid of? Well, we can get rid of this one because this is our stop punctuation. We can get rid of this one because it's our stop punctuation. However, we do see now that we have this one that has no punctuation and this one that has a comma. So one thing that I like to think about is how would you read through this sentence, right? If there's two words that typically would go together, right? Then in that case, you would end up having a no punctuation. If there's two words that don't typically go together in that same sense, right, where there's like a subject and a verb, then you would have your comma. So if we're reading this out, and we'll just start from here. So Swedish poet praise from leading contemporary writers among them. Well, in that case, we actually wouldn't say those two together, right? Because writers among them, Nigerian American essayists. So in this case, we would end up needing a comma. So we would get rid of this one, and our answer choice would be D. Okay? So let's check out the no punctuation, and this can kind of show us a little bit more about this portion. So it says which choice completes the text so that it conforms to the conventions of standard English. You notice that we're going to get that same question type no matter what the problem is with punctuation. They're always going to ask you which conforms to the conventions of standard English. So let's see the first part. So generations of mystery and horror writers. Well, that is an incomplete idea. And let's check the next part. Have been influenced by dark Gothic stories of celebrating American author Edgar Allan Poe. So again, that's going to be another incomplete idea because we don't know who it was, right? So if we're reading this side by itself and this side by itself, we see that we have two incompletes. So we know we're going to use our go punctuation. And then let's see which ones we can get rid of. So right here, we have a dash. We haven't talked about dash uses yet, but that's not going to be a go punctuation. Remember, we have our commas and our no punctuation. We can get rid of our semicolon because we know that's going to be our stop punctuation, right? And now we have these two. So one thing to kind of keep in mind, if there's no reason to use a comma, right? If there's not a list, if there's not a descriptive phrase, if there's nothing along those lines, then we don't need to use a comma. So let's check out this one. So generations of mystery and horror writers have been influenced. Cool. Writers have been influenced. Well, in that case, we don't need a comma in between those two, right? Because it breaks up the flow of what we're talking about. So we would basically get rid of the one with the comma and then go with the one that has no punctuation at the end. Now to our final form of punctuation, we have our half stop punctuation. So half stop is going to be a little bit different. So we have our colons as well as our long dashes, okay? These can be used, can only be used if the first idea in front is complete, okay? And we continue to use our vertical line test. So this is an interesting part, right? So we have complete and incomplete, or we have complete and complete, right? Why is this interesting? Because these are also for our, this would be our go punctuation, right? And this is going to be the stop punctuation. However, there's something that's going to be a little bit different with these. And we'll talk about that in just a second. So remember that it always has to start with a complete idea, and the ending can be either complete or incomplete. So how do we distinguish? Well, in this case, the part that we have after this needs to be an explanation. It needs to explain something. It needs to be an example or a list or like a definition or something like that. Okay. So in this case, even though it's going to be a complete with a incomplete or complete with a complete, whatever this portion is, it needs to follow those specific things. It has to do one of these. So when you're going through and you see a complete and complete or a complete and incomplete, you want to double check to see, does the second part do one of these items? If it does, then it's going to be your half stop punctuation. If it doesn't, it's going to be the go or the stop punctuation. So let's check this one out and see how this will work. We see, again, the question stays the same, conforms to the conventions of standard English. We see where our punctuation is changing. We have two. We have it's changing right there and changing right there. So let's look at the first part first, and then we'll check the second part. So in this case, in 2016, in a 2016 study, Eastern Washington University psychologist ALA found that among the study participants who experience frisson, physiological response akin to goosebumps and getting the chills while listening to music, there was one personality trait that they scored particularly high. Well, that would be incomplete if we just had the high. If we had the high on, that would be complete. So we'll keep that in mind. And then if we had on openness and experience, that would be an incomplete as well. Or openness to experience would also be that incomplete as well. So we see that in this case, we have either our incomplete and our complete, or our incomplete and incomplete. In this case, we know that we can't use the first one where it's the high part right here because that has a stop punctuation. And we know that we don't have two complete ideas. So right away, we know that that one's not going to be correct and that our punctuation is going to need to go after the on part. So let's check this part out now. We said we have complete for the first part, high on, and then incomplete down here. So what do we do? Well, in this case, we know that because it's complete and incomplete, we could have either our half stop or we can have our go punctuation. So those are the two that are left over. So we know we can get rid of this one as well. And then let's check out the last part. So there was one personality trait that they scored particularly high on, openness to experience. So what is the specific last part? Well, this is an explanation of the category that they are, the personality that they trait that they scored particularly high on. So this is an example or an explanation for the previous portion. So in that case, we know that this is going to be our half stop punctuation. So now we get rid of our go punctuation and we go with answer choice D. So the biggest thing when you're thinking about punctuation problems, and why we spent so much time on this, is remember that punctuation is going to be the most highly tested area on the exam. So you just really want to make sure that you're comfortable with those. And again, use these strategies out when you're trying to go through your practice exams, when you're taking the College Board exams online. Make sure that you're using this. Remember, draw in your vertical lines and make sure that you write complete or incomplete. And then just make sure you're always checking that second portion if the beginning part is complete, because complete and incomplete, incomplete and complete do two different functions. It just depends on what that second portion is. Okay. All right. So long dashes. I'll only mention one big thing with long dashes. We won't go over this too much just to make sure that we get enough time to work through a couple other things, is that there's one key thing that really make sure you're thinking about. So when you have long dashes, and especially when you see two long dashes within a answer choice, this is a situation where we want to see, is it a descriptive phrase? Okay. So why is that important? Well, there's three different functions that do a descriptive phrase. You can have a comma and a comma. That works with a descriptive phrase. You can have a dash and a dash. That's also a descriptive phrase. And there's also parentheses. So those all do the same thing. They all have the same function. So what does descriptive phrase mean? If this portion is defining what's before it, then it's going to be that descriptive phrase. Okay. A good way to test it out is if you see that dash part and that dash part and you don't read this portion, does this situation or the sentence still make sense? So in this case, let's check this part. Eli Einsberg, a genetics expert at Tel Aviv University in Israel, recently discovered that cephalopods have a specific genetic ability called RNA editing that confers evolutionary advantages, right? So in that case, we knew that that one works, right? And let's just double check to see why it's going to be descriptive. What is this sentence saying? It's saying ocean dwellers that include squids, octopus, and cuttlefish. So this is a description of these cephalopods, right? So this is why this is a descriptive phrase. And whenever you have this type of situation, then you can separate that with dash and dash, comma and comma, or you could have parentheses and parentheses. So we know that our answer choice in that case is going to end up being D. Okay? So always be on the lookout for dash, dash, or comma, comma, or parentheses. This is just one of those easy ways to kind of work through that. We also saw that we had that in answer choice B, but in this case, why does that one not work? Well, it's just talking about the ocean dwellers. But if we read this sentence out with that, this whole thing discovered that cephalopods that include squids, octopus, and cuttlefish have this. It kind of works, but this is still part of that descriptive phrase. And because this is still part of the descriptive phrase, we need to make sure that the dash ends there as well. Okay. So since we don't have that one, that's why B is incorrect. Okay. Now let's talk a little bit more about some of the other sections, right? So now we're getting into verb agreement. So what is verb agreement? So verb agreement means that you're pairing a singular subject with singular verbs and plural subjects with plural verbs, right? If a verb is underlined, find the subject it relates to. Be careful for collective nouns like groups or teams, and watch for interrupting or unnecessary detail that can get between a subject and its verb. We also have verb tense questions. So verb tense is going to be a time period that or an action occurs. So it must align with the rest of the tense, the verb tense that's within the sentence. So you want to look for those clues. What other verbs do we have within the sentence? And then check for the ones that are not underlined, right? To kind of give you that clue. Look for any time references. So did something happen before another thing or not? And then watch out for that interrupting or unnecessary detail that's there. Note the key at the bottom. The SAT loves testing both verb tense and agreement in single verb questions. So be prepared to apply multiple strategies. One of the things that you'll start to see with some of these questions, that there's going to be a lot of different strategies that you may need to use at different points in time. So just make sure that you're thinking about what are all those different clues that are around. How can you let the test help you? Okay. So let's check out this one. As we see again, which one conforms to the conventions of standard English? The question does not change. However, the answer choices are. So let's check out the question. In recent years, economists around the world have created new tools that quantify the overall well-being of a country's citizens. Economists in India, for example, use an ease of living index. This tool, something economic potential, sustaining, and quality of life, right? Maybe this tool, remember, we want to use our own word, right? So maybe this tool predicts, right? Or shows or shares these types of things. So now we can go through and look and see, well, which one doesn't work. So we notice that in the answer choices, though, we see the same word, but what's changing with that? We see that the ending of that one changes. So in this case, we have measures. So different color. We have measures, measured, measured, and measuring. So we have some past tense, we have some future, and then we want to think that we also want to make sure that that verb noun agreement works. So in this case, since this is a tool, singular, right? That means that it's going to measure something, or measures, right? So if we think about those words, we use tools. So if we have tool versus tools, our plural versus our singular. So our tools measure, and a tool measures. Cool. So just make sure that you're thinking about the ending portion for both. So tool measures and tools measure, right? So in this case, are we thinking about a past, a present, a future, or what, right? So this tool, something economic potential, sustainability, and the citizens' quality of life. Well, when we're talking about this whole portion, it's not just something that happened in the past. It's something that continues to go on. So we know that doesn't work. Would have measured. Well, again, it's not necessarily just something that happened in the past. It's actually something that actually exists, right? Will have being measuring. That just doesn't even sound good, right? So now we're back to our answer choice of A, and then we can say this tool measures economic potential, sustainability, and the citizens' quality of life, right? Okay. And then let's check out apostrophes. So apostrophes are going to be one of those things where we want to make sure that we're thinking about possession. A couple of rules to remember with apostrophes. If you have a noun, right, not a pronoun, just a noun, and it ends in an S. So say, for example, you have, you're talking about a person named Chris. If you're talking about an apostrophe and you want to talk about possession, you know what's happening right there. If you want to talk about possession, then you want to make sure that you're putting the apostrophe after it. Wrong one. If you have somebody like me, if you talk about the name of Paul, then you want to put the S before, or the apostrophe before the S. So that's going to be your possession when you have something that's going to be ending in an S. And then if you don't have it, where it's just going to be ending with any other letter, you want to make sure you're putting it before. Keep in mind that when you're talking about it's, there's a couple different things. So you have its, and you have its, right? That ends in an S. So two of these are actual words. One is not. This one is the possession form. This one is it is. So whenever you see this, you always want to read it out as it is. And then this one just doesn't work. So we don't use the apostrophe after the S when we're talking about pronouns. Okay. So whenever you're thinking about your pronouns, you want to figure out what is the noun and what is the possession, right? So in this case, I'm just going to read the second part of this. According to Lorenzo's metaphor, the wind from a butterfly's flapping its wings in Brazil might eventually grow into a storm elsewhere around the globe. So a butterfly flapping its wings, right? What do we say? We don't want to read out it is wings. So those two don't work. And then its wings, right? Is this going to be plural like this one? Or is this going to be a possession like this? Well, it's not, the wings aren't possessing the in that case. So we know that we can get rid of this one. And this is just two wings that the butterfly is going to be flapping. So again, with our apostrophes, we just want to make sure that we're thinking about what we have there and then using that to answer our questions. The next thing that we have is noun comparison. So when nouns are changing in the answer choices, make sure to underline the nouns, make sure that the underlined nouns are consistent with the other nouns within the sentence. Okay. Always double check for comparisons to confirm that like items are being compared. Check for singular or plural alignment with the other nouns, and then check for singular or plural alignment with the verbs. Okay. So I'll show you one thing. We can always look at our answer choices to see what's changing. So we're a small foam version, are smaller foam versions, or smaller foam versions, or is a smaller form version. So we see that this is a singular thing, this is a plural, this is a plural thing, and this is a plural, right? So we want to make sure that we're thinking about that. And then what else do we notice is changing? Version versus versions, okay? So let's check out the question now and see which one we would go with. Okay. So professional American football player Fred Cox invented one of the world's most popular toys. In 1970s, he came up with the idea that the Nerf for a Nerf football, which what? Well, now we're talking about what is our subject? Our subject is the Nerf football. So is this singular or is this plural? Well, in this case, this is going to be singular. So let me make that. So we know that we need to use our singular area answer choice, right? Which ones are going to be singular? Well, which are doesn't work. Which were doesn't work. Which were doesn't work either. And the only one is D that works because this is our only one that's going to be our singular. Okay. So we want to make sure that we're just defining what our subject is. Once we find out the subject, we want to figure out if it's going to be singular or if it's going to be plural, and then use that as our clue. Again, we keep talking about all those different clues that are within within the passage. So just make sure that you let the passage work for you and use that to kind of help you out. Okay. So this one, I'll just show you something, right? We know that we just talked about the plural or singular part. So let's actually just look in the answer choice and see what we have, right? Were, have been, are, and was, right? So one of the things that you can kind of think about if you're not sure if it's singular or plural, kind of use a pronoun before it. So if you use like they, right, or he, or I, or she, or something like that, or we, right? What word would you put after that, right? So would you put he were or they were, right? You say they were, which we know is going to be a plural situation. He was, right? So that means that that's going to be a singular situation, right? So we know this is singular. We know this is plural. I have been, okay? That could work, right? She has, or they have been, okay? That kind of works as well. I are does not work. They are works, right? So we know this is going to be another plural type of situation, right? Let's see. And then if we think about this one, what if it was he? He have been, that doesn't work, right? So it should have been he has been. So, okay, so we're going to say this is going to be another plural type of situation. So let's check out the answer choice. It says amplify the voices and experience of Black soldiers. So we see that we have that apostrophe S, right? So we're using this plural, right? And now we need to figure out which one do we specifically want. So amplifying the voices and experience of Black soldiers, something of particular interest to Chester, who later became the activist and lawyer during the post Reconstructional period. So now this is kind of tricky, right? Because we would think that it's going to be plural because we have multiple, but remember that this is one of those situations where we have a collective, right? So we're not talking about multiple Black soldiers. We're just talking about those just in general, right? So amplifying the voices and experience of Black soldiers was a particular interest, right? We wouldn't say Black soldiers were, Black soldiers have been of a particular interest to Chester because it's not that fast. And then Black soldiers are of a specific interest doesn't necessarily work, right? So we just want to make sure that when we're going through those problems, we look at all the different keys and clues that are there. Okay? So be aware of what pronoun is used and what it's replacing. Watch out for singular versus plural. Confirm the correct person type. Make sure that it's clear what the subject and the pronoun is referring to, and then look for the switch in case. So again, our subject, our object, and our possession are going to be those key things, right? So again, I'll just show you the beginning part of this one. Remember, we're trying to figure out what is our subject, right? Because we see that the answer choices are pronouns. So we know that we need to find out what the subject is. So if we looked at this sentence, public awareness campaigns about the need for to reduce single-use plastics can be successful, says a researcher, Kim Borg of this university. When these campaigns give customers a choice, for example, Japan achieved 40% reduction in plastic bag use after cashiers were instructed to ask customers whether something wanted a bag. So one thing that we see is that there's a lot of different nouns that are here. We have customers here. We have cashiers here. We have Japan here, right? We have this Kim Berg person here. So we want to figure out which subject we're actually talking about. And in this case, we're talking about the customers. So we would want to make sure that we're thinking about those, right? Which would be a plural type of situation. In this case, we would use they because those other ones are going to be singular and we want to use our plural one. Okay. So again, all these clues, looking through the passage, making sure we understand exactly what the subject is, and then using that to use that process of elimination to get rid of our answer choices. Okay? Awesome. So now let's get to a little bit of the reading part. So this is going to be our research-based questions. Okay. So with research-based questions, we want to do something a little bit different. So what we've talked about so far is more of the English portion. This is going to get a little bit more to some of that reading stuff, right? Where we're really analyzing different things. Okay. So one thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that we're reading the question, identify the goal that the question is asking us, which is going to be the most important step. We want to read for full context, come up with our own prediction, and then use our process of elimination to answer those questions. So let's check out this question. This is something that's new to the SAT, these research-based questions. What they're going to do is they're going to give you different amounts of information, and then they're going to ask you a specific question about those. And we want to make sure that we're thinking, again, what do we think it is first before anything else? Okay? So the question says, the student wants to emphasize the distance covered by a Philadelphia, so let me highlight that, by a Philadelphia Lancaster Turnpike, or by the Philadelphia Lancaster Turnpike. Which choice most effectively uses the relevant information from the notes to accomplish this goal? Okay, so let's check out the information. The Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike road was built in this time. Okay, that doesn't really talk about distance, so we know that's not going to be as important. It was first private turnpike in the U.S. Okay, cool. It doesn't really talk about the distance that was covered. It connected the cities of Philadelphia and Lancaster in the state of Pennsylvania. Well, this kind of talks a little bit about that. And then it was 62 miles long. Okay, cool. So we know that it was 62 miles long and it connected these two places. So now we can use that to use our process of elimination to get rid of our answer choices. So let's check out A, the 62-mile long Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike connected Pennsylvania cities of Philadelphia and Lancaster. Okay, cool. That kind of works. So we'll keep that for now. The Philadelphia and Lancaster Turnpike was first private. Nope, doesn't work, right? So we can do our, remember, a yes, a no, and a maybe. If we see that it doesn't work, we can get rid of it right away. And this is why we speak for ourselves, because we want to make sure that when we're speaking for ourselves, we don't have to worry about that answer choice because we already know exactly what we're looking for. Okay. C says the Philadelphia Lancaster Turnpike, which connected two cities between this. Well, doesn't talk about the distance. The historic road, Lancaster Turnpike, again, that doesn't work. And we go with our answer choice A. So remember, for these types of questions, you always want to speak for yourself first before anything else. Look for what the question's asking specifically, find that information. And as I said before, make sure that you're actively annotating, right? You want to actively annotate and make sure that you're noting everything of importance, okay? We'll skip this one just so we can get to some of the math portion. But again, what's the main thing? We just want to really look and see what the question's asking, right? The student wants to explain the advantage of a new platinum catalyst developed by this person in this college. Which one does this, right? So advantages, right? So we're looking for advantages. Platinum is rare and expensive metal, not an advantage. It was a catalyst for chemical reactions, maybe a little bit. Platinum catalysts typically require a large amount of platinum to be efficient. Researchers, this person colleagues created platinum catalyst that combines, okay, that doesn't talk about it. Their catalyst was highly effective. Okay, cool. We see the highly effective part and required only trace amounts of platinum. Okay, so now we know what we'd be looking for in our answer choice. So we just started that. So let's go ahead and finish it. Researcher, this person, his colleagues created platinum catalyst that combines rare and expensive metals. Okay, cool. That kind of works, but it doesn't answer the advantage part. Like other platinum catalysts, the new platinum catalyst requires a particular amount of metal. Okay, cool. That's not really what we're talking about. Platinum is rare and expensive metal that is used in catalysts for chemical reactions. However, platinum catalysts typically require a large amount of this to be effective. Okay, that kind of works, but it's kind of like a little bit different. So we'll get rid of A as well because that kind of didn't work. While still highly effective, the new platinum catalyst requires far less from rare expensive metals than the other catalysts do. Cool. That one works perfectly and it answers the specific question that we were asked. Okay. So that's going to be the English portion. As you see, with the English portion, you want to make sure that you're writing as much as possible on the exam. You really want to make sure that you're using your tools to help you out so that you can control the material. You don't want to have to kind of think about a bunch of different things. One thing to keep in mind is typically your brain can only think about like 5 to 7 things at the same time. So you might be thinking about where you parked your car at, what you're going to be doing after the exam. You're thinking about the question or about the answer choices. So let's just try to get rid of as much of that extra thought as we can by just annotating as much as we can on the exam. So for the math, we said that there's going to be 35 questions. Oh, sorry, wrong tool. For 22 minutes, right? We have that easy portion as well as that hard portion. And we want to make sure that we're really doing well on the first portion so that we can get to the hard second portion, okay? Math comes right after the reading, and there's a 10-minute break in between those two. Your reading and writing performance does not impact your math modules. Math module 1 is going to be that most important one, right? So you want to focus and give your best effort there. So as we said before, you're going to get your reference sheet. That's going to give you your equations. Use this to your advantage. I will say that one thing that I'd suggest is making sure that you remember these equations right here by heart if you can, just because those are going to help you out for a lot of different reasons. One thing with these two equations, there's going to be a relationship where you see these often. So just knowing those is going to be helpful. You're going to have a lot of questions where you're going to see a 2x and an x type of situation. And if you can just remember those, or if you see like x square root of 2 or x square root of 3, that's a situation where you may have those special right triangles, okay? So just make sure you're comfortable with those equations. As we said, you're going to get a Desmos calculator. And then as far as the questions are typically arranged in increasing difficulty, but that's not necessarily always true with dSAT. You can get questions all over the board. So just something that kind of changed with the SAT to dSAT. SAT used to always be easy to hard. dSAT, they can kind of be a little throughout both, okay? There's 2 question types. There's going to be your multiple choice and your student response. And these are going to be about 5 to 6 per module, okay? And these are going to be mixed in as opposed to how the SAT was previously, where you had all of the multiple choice first, and then you had the free response at the end, okay? So now they're just all mixed together. is that you do have your reference tree provided, but we encourage you to know these formulas already. Like I said, these other ones, you don't see those as often, the ones that are down here. So I'd say just know those first ones, and then use your Desmos calculator or use the one that you're bringing. Make sure that you note that there's also some written relationships as well for circles and triangles, okay? As far as the math content, there's going to be 4 areas. You're going to have your algebra, which we see shows up the most. Advanced math is also the same as your algebra. Then you're going to have your problem solving and data analysis and your geometry and trigonometry, right? As you can see, module 1, the bigger areas are going to be your graphing, your functions, simultaneous equations, substitution, words to equations, statistics, fractions and ratios, and perimeter area and volume. And then these other ones are going to come in, but there's not going to be a ton. So you see that there's not as much geometry or trigonometry that's going to be in these exams. So just something to kind of keep in mind with these types of problems. You really want to make sure that you're thinking about being comfortable with the ones that are asked the most. Remember that every question is going to be worth the same amount. So if you really champion graphs, then you're going to be good. And if you don't really have to worry about like probability, then you're good, right? Because you can really get the most out of these types of questions compared to spending a lot of time making sure you know these. So make sure that you're comfortable with these before anything else, and then you can go on from there. So math, big picture strategies, right? One of the things to kind of remember, you want to target the easiest questions first. So 1 through 7, medium are typically going to be like that, 8 through 15. And then the hard ones are going to be your 16 through your 22. If you're not getting a 600 or above, you probably don't need to necessarily attempt those. You can probably use letter of the day and then spend the majority of your time on the easy and medium because you'll probably get about the same amount right if you use your time on there compared to using letter of the day, okay? So letter of the day, the hardest questions or the ones that you don't have time for, familiarize yourself with your Desmos calculator or your own calculator before your test date. With that said, if you're ever studying or you're practicing or you're doing anything for your SAT, make sure to use that same calculator that you're going to be using for the actual exam, because now you're going to be comfortable with that, comfortable with the functions, comfortable with all that material, okay? So math, right? One of the things to kind of keep in mind is there's a lot of vocabulary problems that you're going to have. Some of the vocabulary problems are going to be things like changing math vocabulary to words. So if you see something is equal to, or the equal sign, or equal to, right? You know that that's going to be equal sign. It's going to be your not equal to sign, greater than, less than, and less than or greater than equal to. For me, I used to get confused with the less than or greater than. One thing that I kind of did was I decided to figure out something that worked for me. So if you think about less than or greater than, I think about the points or I guess kind of like the points that are on each end. And what I can say in this case is that this one only has 1 point, right? And then this one has 2 different points. So because this has 2 different points, this is going to be the greater side. And this is going to be the less side, right? So 1 point compared to 2. And this is one of those key things that you can use to kind of help you out and just remember what the relationship is with greater than or less than. So you're going to have your high part here, and you're going to have your lower part over here. Again, here's a couple more things with math vocabulary. If you see something costs a certain amount, that means it is. If they talk about the sum of something, that's going to be your addition. If they talk about your difference or less than, that's going to be your subtraction. Times or product is going to be your multiplication. And if you see something like per, that's going to be division. So we can replace these words with these specific types of mathematical functions when we see them in the passage, okay? So one thing to keep in mind is that we want to make sure that you're comfortable with PEMDAS. So even though you may have not used this recently, that's just one of those things to make sure you're still comfortable with. PEMDAS is going to be, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, right? This is that acronym to remember it. And then that means that we want to do our parentheses first. So whatever's in our parentheses. So in this case, we do 5. Then we do our exponent. So 5 squared, which is going to be 25. And then we can do our multiplication or division. It doesn't matter with these two, which one we do first, or these two, which ones we do first. So we can multiply by the 3, or we can divide by the 5. What I say is I always like to bring the numbers down compared to bringing them up. So let's just do that division part first. So that gives us another 5 here. And then 5 times 3 is going to give us 15. and then 16 minus our 15 is going to give us 1. So again, you can do your multiplication or division at the same time, or it doesn't matter the order, but oftentimes I like to bring values down compared to bringing them up. It just makes it a lot easier to do lower math than it does with that upper level math, okay? So as far as PEMDAS, how would we do that with this one? Well, we see that we have our question. The given expression is equivalent to bx to the fourth minus 14, where b is the constant, and what's the value of b? Well, we notice that in this case, our bx4 is only going to be related to our x to the fourth term, and what we're going to do is combine like terms. So we want to do what's in the parentheses first. We see that those there's nothing we can do within the parentheses, and then we want to distribute our negative sign to both of our values, right? Just remember that you can always draw this as a -1, just to kind of help you out with making sure that you think about you're multiplying that. So now we get 6x to the fourth plus, because a negative times a negative is going to give you a positive, plus 2x to the fourth. We combine like terms to get that this is going to be 8x to the fourth. And now we know that b, in this case, is going to be equal to 8, right? We didn't even have to worry about this portion because those are going to be our constant values where we have our 5 and our 9. So we know in that case that that's exactly what that's going to end up being. We're only really worried about the bx to the fourth portion. As far as exponents, we have this acronym as well, MADS-PM, right? This is talking about whenever you have exponents, if you're multiplying those two, you're adding them. If you're dividing the two exponents, you're subtracting them. If it's a power of 1, you're going to multiply them, right? So just remember that when you're thinking about this, why are we adding those two? Because this literally means that if we wrote those out, we have 3 times 3 times 3. And then we have 3 times 3, and we're multiplying those two together. And this is why we're adding them. So in this case, we get that this is going to be 3 to the fifth. The same thing with our division. Well, what do we have? We would have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times another 2, right? And then we will be dividing those by what? By 2 times 2 times 2. So each one of these ends up canceling out one of the bottom ones. So in this case, this is why we're just using our simple subtraction. So we're looking at our two values, and then we're going to use our subtraction between the two. So now we get 2 to the third. If we're multiplying, again, remember that this means that we have 4 to the second power to the third. So that means we have 4 squared times 4 squared times 4 squared, which again, if we're thinking about that addition part as well, gives us that this is going to be 4 to the 6. The only other big things to keep in mind is that if you ever have a negative sign, all that does is it flips it from the top to the bottom. So if you have 1 over x to the -1, that means that that negative is going to make you go towards the top. So it's basically going to be x to the power of 1, right? Or if you have x squared or -x squared, that's basically going to be the same thing as 1 over x squared. Okay. So that negative just flips it from whatever it's going to be. So you're just going to use that reciprocal. And then as far as radicals, one thing to remember is that the number that's on top would be what's inside the radical. The number that's on bottom is what's outside. So if we have something like x to the 7 over 11, what would that be if we made a radical expression? Well, the 7's at the top, so that goes inside. The 11's on the bottom, so that goes outside. So it would be the 11th root of x to the 7th power. Okay? So just remember that the top goes inside, the bottom goes outside. And this is what a root basically means. So if you ever need to change it from a root to a fraction, that's all you simply do is you just go that way, and it works backwards and forward as well. Okay? So let's check out this problem. It says, which expression is equivalent to x to the -3 minus x to the 5? Okay. So what we do is we combine our like terms. We see that we have x to the 3 here, x to the 3 here, and then we have our 11 and our 5. So all we do is we simply subtract those two. We get 11 minus 5 is going to be equal to 6. And then we want to bring down our term, x to the third. So we get 6x to the third. And there we are. Okay. Awesome. Now let's check out radicals. So again, as we talked about before, when you're talking about your roots are just basically a power function, right? So in this case, it's just basically to the 1/3 power. This is to the 1/4 power. And then, yeah, that's the main thing with those. So just remember the root system involved in an equation or an expression, not to be confused with the square root, as it could be a cube root, a fourth root, right? This is a 1/2, right? Isolate the radicals on one side of the cube. Only 3 square root rules that you typically need to know for the SAT or the ACT. So just remember, in this case, if you have two things that have the same type of radical, you can just multiply them together and then keep the radical underneath. Okay. As well as if you have something that's divided by something, you can always just separate those radicals out. And then one of the last things you just want to remember that you're only going to have positive roots. That's the main thing that you're going to have to think about with radical expressions. So this one right here says, which of the following expressions is equivalent to this expression? Right? One of the things to kind of think about, and I'll show you this kind of cool little trick, is what does a third root mean? It means you need to have 3 of the same thing to be able to pull it out of the equation. So if we have a third root of x to the third, y to the 5, well, what will we break that down to? Well, this is going to be an x times an x times an x. So we see we have 3 of those things. And then for the y, we'd have y, it's ugly y times y times y times y times y. So we want to have a group of 3. And if we do that, we can see that we have this amount of 3. And then we're leaving those 2 that are still in there. So that means we can pull out 1x and we can pull out 1y. And we get that this is going to be x times y times the square root of y to the second. And I don't see the answer there, so I think they may have meant that this was supposed to be y to the 6th, not y to the 5th. So if it was y to the 6th, that means we would have another y that's in there. We could bring that out, and then we're going to basically get x times y squared, which answer choice is B. Okay. So just remember that we always want to think about the groups that we have, group them in whatever number we have up here, and then that's how we can take those out. For percentages, a couple of things to just kind of remember. A percentage is a portion of 100, right? So percentage is always going to add up to 100%. If there are decimals, it's just going to add up to 1, okay? So read percentage problems carefully. As many appear as word problems, understand the relationship between decimals and percentages, and then find the percentage of a whole number. Use the decimal form as a percent. Okay, so percent change is going to be your difference minus your original. So basically your final minus your original divided by your original times 100%, okay? So difference is just going to be that change that you have. So this question says, what percent of 300 is 75, right? So remember we were talking about word equations and how we would put those together. So we said what percentage of 300? So that means 300 times some percentage, or we'll say x in this case, is equal to, right, is equal to, so we replace that, 75, okay? Well, first of all, we know that it's going to be smaller. We can get rid of this, right? And then let's see, is it going to be half of this? Well, 75 is less than half, so we know it's not going to be 50%. That means 75% is out because it's too high, and we can just go with 25. So sometimes we won't even necessarily have to do all of the math for the questions. We can use our process of elimination with our understanding of different types of strategies to kind of help us out. So instead of always going to our calculator, we can kind of think through this one and get rid of answer choices that just do not work, right? So just keep that in mind for some of these problems. Always think about how you're going to set up something beforehand, right? So if you're going to like drive and you're like backing up into the street, you always want to like look back before to make sure that you're just not like backing up like crazy. So just do a little bit of pre-work so that you don't get into any accidents when you're driving, right? Or you don't get into any type of situations when you're taking the exam. So always think about, how can I set up this problem? How do I want to work through this one? What equations can I already put out there? And is there a way that I can use different types of strategies to answer this question compared to just going through and just working through those problems that way? Okay. Um, so let's check out this question. During the first month of sales, a company sold 1.3 million units of a certain type of smartphone. During the same month, 15% of the units sold were returned. If sales of the return rate remain the same for each of the next 5 months, about how many units of the smartphone will be returned to the company during that 6 months time? Well, in this case, what can we do? We can always just start to think about our equation. Well, if we said if sales and rates return at this rate, so we want to think about the question over the next 5 months. So always highlight your information that you have. How many units of smartphones will be returned during the 16 months, right? So in this case, we know that we need to think about a certain amount. What answer choices can we get rid of? Well, we know we can get rid of this one because it's a little bit too high. And then what do we think about? Well, if we're thinking about this, this is going to be 15% per month, right? So let's do an approximation. What if we just did like around 10%, right? Well, if we did 10%, that's going to be 130 for the first one, right? And then that gives us down to like still around that same amount. So then we have like another like 100 and like 20 or so, right? And then we'd probably have something close to like 1,000 or so. And then another something around there, or 90,000 or something. We'll say something like that. So what we can see is that overall, this is going to be somewhere around 1, 2, 3, 4, 500,000 or so units. How many units of smartphones will return to the company during the 6 months? Sorry. Let's add another one in there. So that's going to be like another like 1,000 or so, something like that. So just by that process of elimination, we can see that we're going to end up getting something where this is going to be too high. This one is going to be a lot closer. And then this one's going to be a little bit too low. So just without even doing that approximation, right? And just remember that we use a lower number than what was actually going to be because it's actually 100 or 15% instead of 10. But just by that, knowing that this is like around like 600,000 or so, if we add in that extra amount, we're going to end up being close to that 95 or 975,000. Okay. So just that process of elimination for some of these problems is going to be helpful. Just remember that there's a lot of different ways that we can solve these problems where we don't have to do all the individual math. Okay. Let's check out this next question. So rates, proportions, ratios, proportions, and rates. Ratios, rates, and proportions are comparisons of known quantities. When two fractions are equal to each other, cross multiplying is an option. Okay? Ask yourself, what's being compared? Where can I cross multiply? Can I plug in the answers, which is going to be a huge thing? And then what units am I dealing with? Okay. So let's check out this question. It says the customer spent $27 to purchase oranges at $3 per pound. How many pounds of oranges did the customer purchase? Well, in this case, we're looking at our units. We said that we have 27, and that's going to be dollars. And then we have $3 this way per pound. And we want to know how many oranges did the person, or how many pounds of oranges did they purchase? So with our units, if we think about units, we want to make sure that those are going to be canceling out. So they need to be on the different parts or on the top and the bottom, numerator, denominator. And if we want to think about pounds being at the top or how many pounds, we want that to be on the numerator. So in this case, we say $27 times 1 pound over $3. Now we can cancel out our dollars. And the units that we're left over with are going to be our pounds. And that means that we're going to get this is equal to 9 pounds. Okay. So just making sure that we're thinking about where our units are can help us out with these types of situations as we go through these different types of problems. Again, what do we have? This one, we have miles per second. And what does the question ask for? It asks for miles per hour. So we just want to make sure that we're thinking about where we would put those different things. So we'd have for 0.76 miles, always write your units out, per second. And then we want to think about how do we convert from seconds to hours? Well, we know that there's going to be 60 seconds per minute. And then we also know that there's going to be 60 minutes per hour. So in this case, we just set up our proportion where our units are going to cancel out. So 60s up here over 1 minute down here. And then 60 minutes versus 1 hour here. And then we can just cross out our variables. And this is one way to kind of help us make sure that we didn't have any, we didn't miss anything. And we see that right now we have our units are going to be minutes per hour. So if we end up multiplying this out, we should be able to get to our value. If we see this, we have what, 1, 2, 3, almost like 4 different ones. So in this case, we would go with that highest number. That's going to be this value that's over here. Okay. All right. So charts and graphs, right? Charts and graphs, remember that charts and graphs also appear in the reading section. When analyzing a chart or graph, ask yourself, what is represented on each axis? What do the variables, if anything, represent? And then what are the units for those? You can determine the relation, and can you determine relationship? So with these, one thing that we wanted to talk about before is plugging in our own values, right? So plugging in is a really cool thing that we can do. What does that mean? Well, that means that we can pick a value. And when we pick that value, we can just go and see where it meets on the X and Y. So in this case, we'll just draw a straight line to one of the points and then draw it over here. And then we can just plug that value into our answer choices and see which one gives us what. So what we would do in this case is we plug in X is equal to 1 and see which one of those is going to give us Y is equal to 10. This is why plugging in is a very good strategy, because now we already have the points. We don't even need to think about what this equation wants to look like. Okay? So that's one thing to kind of consider. We can do it that way. Another thing to do is if we think about X is equal to 0, right? And this is one of the points that I like even more for these types of situations. What do we know Y is? We see Y is equal to positive 20. So in that case, we know that if we just get rid of those, what we should see is the one that has 20 as our answer choice. And just like that, we see that our answer choice is B. And we didn't even have to plug in anything to do any extra additional math. We can just use 0 as our part that we're plugging in, see that that's going to be equal to 20, and then get towards answer choice B, just like that, right? So when we're talking about strategies and how we want to go through these different problems, we want to make sure that we're thinking about what tools or what clues are there to kind of help us out. Just as we mentioned with the reading and the writing portion, there's a lot of different clues and a lot of different strategies that we can use depending on what the problem is. So again, always look and try to figure out how you want to attack a problem before you start to attack it. And that's just going to make it a lot easier for you, okay? So let's use that same strategy. Okay? So this line graph shows the percentage of cars on sale used to use quite a lot on a given day by model. We read our axes. These are going to be our model years. This is going to be our percentage, our percent of car sales. For what model year did the percentage of car sales, what model year is the percent of cars for sale the smallest? Well, what do? We find our spot. We come down to our value, draw it down here, and then we see that that's going to be our 2014. Okay? Same thing with bar graphs. We know that this is going to be our number of cans. We see this is going to be the groups. It says the bar graph shows the distribution of 419 cans collected by 10 different groups for a food drive. How many cans were collected by a group of 6, right? So what do? We go to a group of 6. We draw our line directly over. We see that's going to be our 40, and there we go. Okay? So make sure that you're actively drawing, even for these. A lot of times with the graphs, some of them can be a little bit tricky when you're looking at them. So just to make sure that you don't make any type of mistakes, make sure that you're actively drawing from your x-axis into your y-axis to pinpoint the exact value. Some of them will be a little bit closer than others. So we just want to make sure that we're capturing all of that information when we're going through these questions. Next, let's check out this question. So this one says the 5 smallest countries in 2016. It gives us our country and it gives us our land area by square meters. This question says the table above shows the land area in square meters in the 5 smallest countries in 2016. based on the table, what is the main land area of the mean land area of the 5 smallest countries in this? Um, we have this really cool strategy that we can do for these, where we're trying to think about the overall value. But let's see, do we need to do that all the way? Well, we have 2 values that are super small. We have one value that's pretty big, and then we have some other values that are pretty small, right? So we know at least that we can get these out the way. And that means that at least we'd have a 50% chance if we guessed. But one of the cool things that we can do with mean is this thing called a circle T. So with circle T, what we do is we basically draw a circle for every average that we have. On the top, we're going to have our total amount of values. On the bottom, we're going to have our number of things. And down here, we're going to have our average. Why is this important and why is this cool? Because if we take these two, the number of things and the average, and we multiply them together, we get the total. If we take the total and we divide it by our number of things, we're going to get our average. And if we take our total and divide it by our average, we're going to get our number of things. So in this case, what we would do is we create our circle T. We'd have our number of things, which is going to be 5. We add up our values. So one of the other cool tricks that I do is I will break them up into tens. So I basically say they have 20 plus 20 plus 60 plus, okay, that's that part. And then we'd also have plus 2, plus 1, plus another 1, plus 6. And then we have plus 0.44, right? So now we know that this is going to be 80. We see that that's going to be 10. So we get this is 90.44. And then if we think about 90 divided by 5, right, we know that if we do 5 times 20, that's going to be 100, right? So this one says which one is going to be the closest, right, the nearest. So that means that 22 would be higher and A is going to be our answer choice, okay? So you can use this circle T for any type of average problem that you're working through, and that can help you out that way, okay? One thing just to kind of consider, as far as your box and whisker part, you want to make sure you're comfortable with this. This is going to be your median. This is going to be your lower quartile. This is going to be your higher. And then this is going to basically be your other different values, right? So what we want to do in this case is we want to just figure out what our median is going to be, and then we're good with 5, okay? So again, we said that we're going to use these equations. Just make sure that you're comfortable with this and you know how to access this. And then for lines and angles, you want to make sure that you guys have all these remembered, right? So supplementary angles, your complementary angles, right angles, what tangent means, parallel lines, perpendicular lines, interior angles, bisecting, and transversal, right? If you're not necessarily sure, just make sure to review these, before the exam, and you should be good. Whenever you're dealing with angles, you always want to just fill in the information that you know. So whether it's triangles, whether it's lines, whenever there's some type of degree measurement, figure out what you know, and then just start to fill that out until you get to your area that you're looking for. So this one, it says in the figure, line M is parallel to N, and what is the value of W? So in this case, what do we do? Well, we know that this is 170. That means that if we know this is going to be a straight line that has to have 180 degrees measurements, that means that this is going to be 10. And that means that this one down here is also going to be 170. And because this is opposite of that one, it's also going to end up being 170. And we get that D is our answer choice, okay? Rectangles and squares, you want to make sure that you remember these equations. Perimeter is going to be the amount or the distance around any object. Your area is going to be your length times your width. Just so happens that with your squares, they're both going to be the same. So you want to keep those squared. And then for your rectangle, it's going to be your 2 length times your 2 width for your perimeter. And then your area is going to be your length times your width, okay? So this question says the side length of a square is 55 centimeters. What is the area in centimeters squared of the square? So what do we say area is? It's going to be our length times our width. So anytime you have any type of problem, always draw out your equation. And then that lets you know exactly what you need to plug in for your values. So in this case, we're going to get 55 times 55. And again, we don't even necessarily have to do this math, because if we just think about the last numbers that are there, we have a 5 times a 5. And that means that we're always going to get something that's like a 25, or it's going to have a 5 ending on it. And only one of our answer choices has a 5 at the end. So we know which answer choice we're going to go with without even doing all of our math. So again, there's so many small little tips and tricks and strategies that can help us out. Why are these important? Well, when you're thinking about the exam, you want to make sure that you answer the easy questions as quick as possible. So then you have time to get to some of those harder questions where you can use a lot, where you may need to use a lot more time and a lot more brain energy. So save yourself by thinking about how you can work through some of these. And again, this is why we have these sessions, because we want to make sure that we give you guys different types of strategies that you can kind of keep in mind when you're going over these different types of problems. Okay. So triangles, just rules to know. Area is going to be equal to 1/2 base times height. So whenever you get a triangle problem, you always want to write that out. Area is equal to 1/2 base times height. This one's a triangle, similar triangle type of problem. We'll skip this one for now, but just remember, whenever you're writing your similar triangles, you just want to write out your sides. In this case, if we needed to, we can always divide these out to our different values to kind of help us out, right? So if we wanted to divide those all by 2, we get that this is 10, we get that that's 24, we get that this is going to be, is that 25, 26, right? And then if we wanted to divide those even more, we get 5, 12, and 13. So we know that tangent is going to be opposite over hypotenuse. So in that case, or sorry, opposite over adjacent. So we know in that case, these two would be out, and we just use one of these depending on what our opposite and our adjacent is. In this case, RST is given this one, UWV, they want to know the tangent of V. So V would be our angle, so it'd be the one in between these two. So we end up having it as this would be our opposite and our adjacent, so 5 over our 12 in that case. As far as our circles, again, we want to just make sure we're thinking about our equations. Cool thing about the circle equation is that you have your area and your circumference. The only difference is where this 2 is. So when you're talking about your area, because it's 2-dimensional, you know that you're going to have it squared. And your circumference, it's not 2-dimensional, it's 1-dimensional, so it's going to be going in the front. So just make sure you remember those equations, and you should be good. So yeah, we won't worry about this one for now. I'll show you this last couple of things. So we'll go over a couple quick slides, and then we'll finish off with the last part of the presentation for today. Okay? So just remember, your slope is going to be your rate of change. You always want to think about how steep something's going to be. So slope is always going to be your rise over your run. So your change in y, sometimes you're going to see it as a delta y over a delta x. This just means change. Okay. Just make sure you're comfortable with that. And you can pick any 2 points. One thing that I always suggest is that if you have 0, 0, always use it as a point, because that's always going to be the easiest one where you can kind of just not have to worry about the other parts as much. So this one says what value of P satisfies the equation above. So we can just basically solve for that one. What will we do? We're going to minus our 180 from both sides. And like I said, actively draw on here. So that's going to give us that 5P is equal to 70. And then in that case, we know that we can just plug in our answer choices, and we get that our P is going to be equal to 14. And again, we could use that quick process of elimination where we didn't even have to use all the answer choices. We didn't even have to do the math. We know that 65 times 5 is going to be something that's super large, right? So again, always setting up the problem ahead of time helps us out. Yeah. Let's see. So we'll skip over these expression parts. The biggest thing that we'll say is just make sure that linear is going to be your straight line. Exponential change is going to be something that increases at some type of exponential rate. So if it's just a constant rate, then it's going to be your linear. If it's an exponential rate, it's going to be your crazy type of change. So in this case, we see that this is just going to be a linear type of situation. What does your 16 mean? Well, whatever's in front of this number is going to be your rate of change. So now we can just think about rate of change, and this is not going to be our total. And then we know it's not 1 over 16. It's going to end up being our 16. Cool. All right. So now just to the last steps, or last slides. So why enhanced prep? Right. Enhanced prep was formed with the design of elevating the experience for all involved: students, parents, counselors, and tutors. So by gathering the information that best characterizes with the industry, we're able to provide enhanced tutoring. Okay. So we always want to make sure that we're thinking about the invaluable curriculum that we have. We have expert instructors. So all of our instructors have some type of advanced degree and have tutored for 5+ years. And then we always like that transparency. So we want to make sure that when we are having any information, we're including the parents, we're including the tutor, we're including the advisor, we're including the student, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. And we use a team type approach to build off of that. Okay. As far as admission decisions, one of the things to kind of keep in mind is that your GPA and your class rigor are going to be the two most important things to kind of have. So colleges look at that 45 to 50% of the time. This is 50% of your merit-based scholarships. And then for your test scores, 20% to 35%, and then 50% of merit-based scholarships. Why is this important? Why your class GPA and your class rigor is going to be the most important. You get the most bang for your buck out of your ACT or SAT because you spend a small amount of time on that exam and you get a big gain. Okay? So we really want to make sure that you're utilizing that as much as possible. So what's next? What does your college application look like? Again, you have your class rigor, your test scores, your academic curiosity, and your GPA. As far as tutoring programs, there's a lot of different tutoring programs that we provide. So homework support, small group, TOEFL, PSAT, ACT, AP exams. So if you need support with any of those things, feel free to reach out. As far as the tests, both tests are different, and depending on how you do on one exam, or depending on how you would do on a practice exam, can kind of let us know if we would support, or if we would suggest you go to the ACT or the SAT. So one of the things that you can do is you can reach out to us and take a practice exam, and that will help you get a chance to figure out which test is going to be correct. And then our advisors can kind of help you out with that as well. Okay. So prep options, we have a couple different things that are really cool. We have an on-demand course that's a self-taught or self-learning, self-paced course that you can work through. We have group courses, so they're going to be small group courses. And then we also have one-on-one tutoring. So there's a couple different options. We have our triple play, where it's almost 40 hours of instruction, over 24 hours of lessons on demand, 12 hours of live instruction in small group course, and then 3 hours of one-on-one tutoring. Again, our on-demand course, you can do this 24 hours at your own pace. It covers every question type on the SAT. There's quizzes, there's modules. You get 2 full-length practice exams, and then 6 months of access to this course, which is really cool, so that you can go away and you can always come back and you have all your progress saved. We additionally have small group courses where there's going to be a small amount of students that are there. This is going to be $499 per student, and you get 12 hours of expert-led instruction that covers all the different things. So today we got to go through some of those things, but this goes way into depth, or more into depth with those. You also get video recordings and annotated notes from those as well, so you'll have that for yourself. Okay? One thing that we like to do here at EP is we have a 3 pillars to our success. So we want to make sure that you're good with your content. We want to make sure that you have a strategy going into the exam, and then a game plan. As we said, not every student is going to try to score or answer every single question. That's not going to be the best path to get you to your highest score. So you want to make sure you have a game plan. You also want to make sure you have your content covered, and then your strategy, right? Like when we're talking about that 55 times 55, well, we know it's going to be the 5 at the end. So that goes into our strategy. So we have all these different pieces of things that we can kind of use to kind of help you out. Okay. One-on-one tutoring, a couple more slides. We think about tutor matching. So every single student is matched with a totally different tutor because we want to make sure that the tutor and the student have a really good relationship. As far as our team approach, like we said, we use the parents, the students, the advisor, and the tutor, right? So we do a recap video after every tutoring session, so that lets the parents know what was covered during that session. And then you also have access to all this information. We use a lot of data-driven information as well, and we work on building confidence as well. We have a lot of different free events that are coming up. Not only do we do SAT strategy, we also have navigating the college admissions portion, as well as ACT strategy and building balanced college lists. We also have courses, free courses like test anxiety or emotional wellness type of course as well. And these are all free for you and your friends. Feel free to share this with them. And again, ways we can help if you need help setting up your testing timeline, if you want to review your personal testing needs, compare your SAT versus ACT, if you want to understand your PSAT score report, or if you have any type of questions, we have a 30-minute free drop-in consultation that you can do. This is a link for our testimonies for different families that are testimonials from different families if you want to check that out. And that's it for today. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to advisors at Enhanced Prep, or you can reach out and call 323-433-97755. So first of all, thank you guys for staying for this presentation. Are there any questions that you guys have? Okay. So with that said, I'll let you all go. I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. I hope to see you guys in some of our small group courses. And outside of that, have an amazing rest of your weekend. Take care. And like I said, if you have any questions, always just feel free to reach out to us. We do a lot of free events. So check those out. Yeah, have a great day. Okay. Take care, everybody. Bye. Oh, wait, one question. Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.